What's that scenery?
I promised Carol a variety show she's gonna get one. That's Pigs in Space.
But what about the dance marathon?
Oh, don't worry.
Yeah, we've worked out a compromise.
Remember when a bunch of felt puppets somehow became the sharpest comedy on television, and nobody ever fully explained how that happened? The Muppet Show premiered in 1976 and ran for 5 seasons. Created by Jim Henson, the show blended vaudeville chaos, celebrity cameos, and backstage meltdowns into something that looked effortless, and absolutely was not. Jim Henson performed Kermit the Frog, the world's most stressed stage manager. Frank Oz brought Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, and Animal to life. Dave Goelz gave Gonzo a voice and a personality built entirely around not knowing what he was. And together with a rotating lineup of celebrity guests who willingly walked into controlled chaos, they turned a puppet show into one of the smartest things on television. Today we're counting down 15 weird and wonderful facts about the Muppet Show. And stick around for number 1, because Jim Henson got rejected by every American network, and his revenge tour started on a completely different continent. But before we jump in, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still sings "Mahna" at random. Now, let's get into the countdown. Number 15, Kermit wasn't a frog at first. The most famous amphibian in entertainment history spent his first decade not being an amphibian at all. Kermit showed up in 1955 as a vaguely polite green situation, and everyone just kind of went with it. Jim Henson built the original Kermit for a local Washington, D.C. TV show called Sam and Friends. With zero budget and even less oversight, he did what any future creative genius would do. He raided the family trash. The first Kermit was sewn from his mom's old turquoise spring coat that she'd thrown away, with the interior built from a pair of Henson's old jeans. The eyes were ping pong balls that were sliced in half with pupils painted on by hand. For over a decade, that's what Kermit was, a lizard-ish abstract character with no real species, no backstory, and no collar. Nobody called him a frog. Nobody needed to. He was just Kermit. Then the frog thing started creeping in on its own. Johnny Carson called him Kermit the Frog on The Tonight Show in 1965, years before it was official. A 1966 toy catalog listed him as a fanciful frog. Kermit even called himself a frog in a 1968 TV special. The identity was forming whether Henson planned it or not. The full transformation came with 1969's Hey Cinderella, when Henson redesigned the puppet, swapping the round feet for flippers and adding that trademark pointed collar. The collar served double duty. It made him look more frog-like and hid the seam where his neck met his body. By then, Kermit already had found his voice, calm, earnest, and just permanently overwhelmed by chaos that he technically caused. Today, that original coat-based Kermit sits in the Smithsonian, a national treasure built from a discarded coat, some old jeans, and 2 ping pong balls. Number 14, SNL hated the Muppets. Before the Muppet Show existed, Jim Henson was looking for a way to prove that his puppets could work for adults, not just kids watching Sesame Street. So when NBC brought him aboard Saturday Night Live in 1975, hoping his Muppets would soften their risky new show, Henson jumped at the chance. It seemed like a perfect match. It was not a perfect match. The Muppets appeared regularly on SNL's first season in a recurring segment called The Land of Gorch. Now, these weren't the Muppets that we came to know and love. Their names were King Clubus, Queen Poeta, Scred, Whis, and the stone idol, the Mighty Favog.
Know what your son Whis is doing?
What, has he locked himself in the bathroom with a magazine again?
No, your son Whis is smoking craters.
On top of Old Smoky!
They lived in a bleak wasteland, they made constant sexual innuendos, and behaved like creatures who had been banned from Sesame Street for cause. Now here's where it all fell apart. Writers Guild rules meant only the SNL writing staff could script the Muppet segments. Henson and his team weren't allowed to write a single word, so the Muppets' fate landed in the hands of people who wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. Michael O'Donoghue flat out refused to write for them, declaring, "I don't write for felt." He later called them the Mucking Fuppets in a Playboy interview, and that was the cleaned up version. Alan Zweibel said the writers drew straws each week, and whoever lost got stuck with the Muppet sketch. It was like comedy jury duty that nobody could get out of. The cast wasn't any warmer. John Belushi was particularly vocal about sharing airtime with puppets on a live show. It was straight up territorial warfare behind the scenes. The Gorch sketches, they never clicked, and by the end of season 1, the Muppets were done at SNL. But that failure, it saved everything. The collapse taught Henson the lesson he needed. The Muppets couldn't work as guests in someone else's world, performing someone else's material. They needed their own stage, their own writers, and their own chaos. The Muppets left SNL and built an empire. Number 13, America passed on The Muppet Show twice. Now, before The Muppet Show became family-friendly chaos, Jim Henson produced a 1975 pilot with a title that was so aggressive that it sounded like a parental warning stuck on the wrong VHS tape. The Muppet Show, Sex and Violence.
Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the end of sex and violence on television.
And it wasn't even his first attempt. He'd already made a pilot called The Muppets Valentine Show a year earlier. But this time, Henson wanted to make a statement. He was tired of the Muppets being typecast as kids' entertainment, and the title was his way of spoofing the explosion of sex and violence on television. Now, in his own words, it was a humorous hook. Basically, here's everything you're clutching your pearls about, but performed by puppets. The pilot featured a pageant themed on the 7 deadly sins: envy, sloth, lust, the whole lineup, judged by Muppets with zero moral authority. And it was hosted not by Kermit, but by a humanoid Muppet named Nigel. Henson deliberately sidelined Kermit to a tiny cameo because he wanted to establish a new lead character, and he later admitted that that was a mistake. But buried inside the chaos was a goldmine of characters who'd outlived the pilot by decades. The Electric Mayhem, Dr. Teeth, Floyd Pepper, Janice, Zoot, and Animal all debuted here. So did Sam the Eagle, the Swedish Chef, Statler and Waldorf, and Crazy Harry. Early versions of Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, and Gonzo were lurking in the background too, waiting for their moment. The pilot got solid reviews, but here's the kicker. American networks still wouldn't pick up on the series. Henson had to go all the way to England and partner with Lord Lou Grade to finally get The Muppet Show on the air. The US networks passed on one of the most beloved shows in television history twice. So, Sex and Violence, yeah, it did its real job. It proved that the Muppets could aim jokes at adults without losing warmth, strip away the provocation and keep the intelligence, and suddenly the formula clicked. It just took leaving the country to find someone willing to bet on it. Number 12, Miss Piggy was a background nobody that 4 people played. Miss Piggy, the diva, the karate queen, the self-appointed center of everything. Well, she started out as a background pig that nobody could figure out what to do with. She didn't have a starring role, heck, she barely had a name, and for a while, she didn't even have a consistent performer. The puppet first showed up in 1974 when Frank Oz performed a character called Piggy Lee on The Tonight Show, just a pig lip-syncing to a song. Then a few months later, Jerry Nelson performed a version of her on the Herb Alpert special. Then Fran Brill played a beady-eyed blonde pig in the Sex and Violence pilot. 3 appearances and 3 different puppeteers. Nobody had claimed her yet. The name, by the way, was an homage. Muppet designer Bonnie Erickson originally called her Miss Piggy Lee after jazz singer Peggy Lee. Once the character started to get some attention, though, they quietly shortened it to Miss Piggy to avoid a phone call from Peggy Lee's lawyers. When The Muppet Show launched in 1976, Piggy was still a supporting player, and Frank Oz was still sharing the role with Richard Hunt for most of the first season. She was meant to be a one-note running gag, a lovelorn pig with a crush on the frog. That was the whole bit. Then something happened. Oz locked into the character and started building layers that nobody expected. Brute force underneath desperate glamour. A short fuse wrapped in an evening gown. That tension turned a throwaway gag into the most complex character on the show. By the end of season 1, Oz he had the role full time. By season 2, Peggy was the breakout star, anchoring Pigs in Space and Veterinarian's Hospital and really steamrolling every guest who walked through the door. Oz once said that Fozzie was two-dimensional, and Animal had no dimensions at all. And Piggy was one of the only Muppets that he considered fully three-dimensional. Number 11, Mahna, came from an Italian exploitation film.
Mahna.
That goofy, unstoppable earworm that's been stuck in your head since childhood came from a place that would make a PTA board faint. Mahna didn't start with the Muppets. It actually started in a 1968 Italian Mondo documentary called Sweden, Heaven and Hell. A pseudo-documentary built on shock value, sensational editing, and a fixation on what supposedly made Swedish culture scandalous. The film was a sensationalized look at Swedish sexual culture. Free love, nudity, strip clubs, and plenty of content that has never once appeared on a lunchbox. The song was composed by Piero Umiliani, and the original title was Viva la sauna Swedish, which translates to Hooray for the Swedish sauna. Now, in the film, it played over a scene of Swedish women heading into the sauna wrapped in towels. Breezy, jazzy background music for an audience that had absolutely not shown up for children's programming. Then Jim Henson heard it And where most people heard European softcore vibes, well, Henson heard pure comedic gold. He first used the tune on Sesame Street in November of 1969, performing it with a shaggy, wild-haired character who'd later be known as Bip Bipadoda. Now, 3 days later, just 3 days, he brought it to the Ed Sullivan Show. This time with a more refined version of the character alongside two pink backup creatures called the Snoths. That Ed Sullivan performance is where the Mahna bit really, as we know it, took shape. 7 years later, Henson reworked that same routine as the opening number of the Muppet Show premiere in 1976, and it became the show's instant signature moment. Three fuzzy creatures arguing over how to sing a song with no real words, and somehow it was just the funniest thing on television. The transformation was total. Every trace of the song's original context evaporated. The original Umiliani recording, not a Muppets version, the actual Italian original, cracked the UK top 10 in 1977, riding entirely on Muppet Show hype. A novelty track from an exploitation film climbing the charts because puppets made it legendary? What? Number 10. The laugh track was a necessary evil. Now, Jim Henson did not want a laugh track on his show. He thought they cheapened comedy and trained audiences when to react instead of trusting them to just get the joke on their own. So he tested the pilot without one. He watched it back and then tried it again with the laugh track added. His own verdict? It's unfortunate, but it does make the show funnier. So the laugh track stayed. But Henson? He did it his way. Because the Muppet Show was filmed in England, far from the American studios that had all used the same recycled canned laughter, Henson's team built their own laugh track from scratch. The cast and crew recorded their real reactions during playbacks, and those genuine laughs became the show's signature sound. People were so convinced that the show was filmed in front of a live audience that fans actually called in asking for tickets to tapings. But there was no audience. There were just puppeteers cracking each other up in studio. During a season 2 episode with Steve Martin, the regular show was canceled for the night in favor of open auditions, meaning that there was no in-universe audience. So the laugh track was dropped entirely. Instead, the only laughter that you heard came from the Muppet performers themselves watching from behind the scenes. Richard Hunt's laugh was so loud that they actually had to mix in some recorded laughter just to keep it from sounding like one guy just losing his mind in the back row. Henson took something that he was reluctant to use, made it entirely his own, and then spent 5 seasons just poking fun at it from the inside. Number 9. Miss Piggy was the co-star that everyone wanted. Guest stars on The Muppet Show could have shared scenes with anyone. Kermit, he's charming. Fozzie, he's safe. Scooter, polite. And yet, celebrity after celebrity walked onto set and specifically requested the pig who would karate chop them on camera without a shred of remorse. Miss Piggy was the most sought-after co-star on the show, and it wasn't even close. Her diva energy ran so hot that sharing a scene with her felt less like a sketch and more like an ambush that you volunteered for. The ego was enormous, the temper was faster, and her absolute certainty that every moment of television should revolve around her made grown adults look like supporting characters in their own careers. That's what made her irresistible, though. Piggy let celebrities play against someone even bigger than themselves. Elton John leaned straight into her theatrical chaos and turned their duet into a spectacle. Decades later, the tradition kept going. Modern performers still angled to be paired with Piggy in specials, fully aware that they'd be emotionally bulldozed on camera and love every second of it. Number 8, Gonzo wasn't always Gonzo. Before he was the great Gonzo, he was Snarl, the cigar box Frackle, a small, scruffy creature built by Jim Henson for a 1970 TV special called The Great Santa Claus Switch. His big moment? Popping out of a cigar box to hand the villain his cigar. That was the whole job. He had about as much screen presence as a lint ball with eyes.
Hey, give me a cigar over there.
Here it is, boss.
Thank you. You do good work, fella.
You criminal.
But after that special, the puppet drifted. He popped up silently in a few early 1970s appearances, including the 1974 special with Herb Alpert, looking like a creature who hadn't been told what he was supposed to be yet. Well, because he hadn't. When the Muppet Show launched, the puppet finally got a name and a purpose, but in season 1, Gonzo was still pretty undercooked, a permanent sad-looking character stuck in the background. Between seasons, Dave Goelz modified the puppet, adding movable eyelids that completely changed the game. Suddenly, Gonzo could go from mopey to manic, and the character took off. And that became the bit. Other Muppets guessed what he was. A turkey, a blue thing, a weirdo. The writers eventually stopped pretending that there was an answer and just leaned all the way into the mystery. Gonzo was officially a whatever. He was proudly unclassifiable. The one Muppet whose species was a shrug. In 1999, Muppets from Space technically solved it by revealing that Gonzo was an alien. It was sweet, it was earnest, and everybody quietly ignored it. Dave Goelz himself later told audiences that the alien thing was just done for the movie, because alien explained him, but whatever really fit him. All right, quick pause before something explodes backstage. Which Muppet was your favorite growing up? Let me know in the comments, and while you're down there, hit that like button and subscribe. We drop new retro TV deep dives every week. All right, let's get back into the countdown with number 7. Puppeteers required physical therapy. The Muppets looked effortless. Bright colors, big smiles, loose limbs bouncing around like they just ran on pure joy. But behind the scenes, that joy, it was held together with ice packs and orthopedic appointments. Puppeteering on The Muppet Show was less whimsical art form and more competitive endurance sport that nobody signed a waiver for. The standard position was brutal. Neck twisted, back bent. Shoulders doing things that shoulders were really never designed to do. Some scenes required performers to lie on their backs in cramped spaces for hours. Grueling shooting schedules, season after season. Dave Goelz, the man behind Gonzo, endured 4 shoulder surgeries and a hip replacement over the course of his career. 9 surgeries total, from making a blue whatever look emotionally alive. And he wasn't alone. Chronic neck, shoulder, and back injuries were basically a job requirement. The characters, they were adorable. The damage, not so much. Henson's team used TV monitors positioned out of frame so performers could see what the audience saw, a technique that Henson had been developing since the 50s. It was essential to the Muppet style, but it also meant the puppeteers were constantly performing in one direction while looking in another. Now, over the years, the production developed increasingly creative solutions, rigs, supports, and positioning techniques to ease the strain. But the fundamental reality never changed. Somebody had to go hold that puppet up. So every time a Muppet waves or holds a pose a beat too long, that's somebody's rotator cuff making a sacrifice. Number 6, Statler and Waldorf were named after fancy hotels.
When Statler and Waldorf, the 2 old gentlemen who usually sit up here, have died.
The internet's comment section showed up decades early, wearing suits, sitting in a balcony, and heckling everyone who came along.
He's actually gone. Will we ever forget him?
Who?
You know, what's his name?
Statler and Waldorf weren't random names pulled from a phone book. Both were famous luxury hotels in New York City, the Statler Hilton and the Waldorf Astoria. Crystal chandeliers, tuxedo doormen, the kind of places where sending back a steak is considered a personality trait. Jim Henson named the 2 loudest critics after establishments that were built entirely on the expectation of excellence and the God-given right to complain when it isn't delivered. 2 old money snobs spending every single episode shouting insults at a variety show that they kept voluntarily attending. They weren't there because they hated the show, they were there because complaining was the show. The hotel connection went even deeper. Waldorf's wife was named Astoria, completing the Waldorf Astoria set. And when she finally appeared in a 1979 episode, the payoff was pure Muppet chaos. She looked exactly like Statler in a dress. Same face, same scowl, same energy. And to this day, nobody can actually confirm who performed her. The puppeteer behind Astoria remains a genuine mystery. Multiple Muppet performers have been asked over the years, and not one of them can remember. The original internet trolls, just with better suits and balcony seats. Number 5, every Muppet is left-handed. Now here's something that's going to ruin every rewatch for the rest of your life. Go watch any episode of The Muppet Show, any one, and pay attention to the arms. Now every Muppet is left-handed. Kermit strums banjo with his left, Janice and Floyd hold their guitars like southpaws, Scooter gestures with his left, Fozzie waves with his left. I mean, if a Muppet picks something up or reaches for something or even points at something, it's always the left hand. Always. And the reason is incredibly simple. It's because you're probably right-handed. Now, most puppeteers are right-handed, and the right hand has the hardest job. It goes inside the Muppet's head. That's the hand running the mouth, syncing the lips to dialogue, tilting the head to show emotion. All the fine motor work that makes you believe that a piece of felt actually has feelings. The left hand is what's left over. It either slides into a Muppet's left glove hand, that's how Ernie picks things up, for example, or it holds a thin rod attached to the Muppet's left wrist, which is how Kermit gestures. Now, either way, the Muppet's left arm is the only one moving. The right arm just kind of hangs there, limp, pinned to the body, doing absolutely nothing. Now, when a scene requires both hands, Rolf playing piano, the Swedish chef swinging a cleaver,
Flop into Jack and the Pick and the Jack and the Here's for him, steer near bush gear.
a second performer has to step in and operate the Muppet's right arm. The industry term for this is right-handing, and it doubled as the Muppet Apprenticeship Program. Before Henson trusted you with your own character, you had to spend your time crouched next to a veteran, operating one arm of their puppet, learning the timing, matching the movements, and trying not to wreck the shop. Richard Hunt started that way on Sesame Street before eventually landing Scooter, Janice, and Statler. Dave Goelz and Steve Whitmire paid the same dues. Now, there was exactly one exception to the whole left-handed thing on The Muppet Show: Louise Gold. She was left-handed, the only southpaw puppeteer in the entire cast. That meant that her right hand went into the head, and her left hand was free to operate the puppet's right arm. So her characters, including Annie Sue Pig, were right-handed Muppets in a left-handed world. Muppet fans could actually identify Gold's puppetry just by watching which hand a character favored. If a background pig reached for something with its right hand, that was Louise. Number 4, the Muppet name was a polite lie. The most recognized puppet brand in television history was built on a word that means absolutely nothing. And Jim Henson sold that cover story with the confidence of a man who knew nobody was going to audit him. For years, Henson told interviewers that Muppet was a clever mashup of marionette and puppet. Journalists scribbled it into notebooks, nodded like they cracked a code, and then moved on. The explanation had legs, and Henson just let it run. But here's the thing, it wasn't even his first cover story. Back in the 50s, he told a reporter that the name was a cross between hand puppet and stick puppet. By the 70s, he'd switched to the marionette version, which sounded slicker and stuck harder. 2 decades and 2 different fake etymologies. 0 corrections from the press. Then, in the early 80s, Henson casually let the air out of the whole thing. He admitted in an interview that it was just really a term that he made up. Said that he'd been telling people the marionette line for years, but the truth was simpler. He just liked the way it sounded. And here's the kicker. Henson barely used marionettes at all. So the idea that he named his life's work after a puppet style that he almost never touched should have been the giveaway. Nobody caught it for 20 years. Number 3, the show ended on purpose, not by failure. By 1981, The Muppet Show was reaching over 235 million viewers across more than 100 countries. Awards, merch, global saturation, every television rulebook on the planet said the same thing. Just keep going until the wheels fall off. But Jim Henson looked at all of that and then walked away. The show wasn't struggling. Henson just felt the edges softening, and he knew what that meant. The variety format had settled into a groove. The jokes landed on schedule, the chaos was controlled. Head writer Jerry Jewell later admitted that the writing team felt like they were running out of fresh ideas and didn't want the show to go stale. For a team that thrived on creative chaos, comfortable? That's a warning sign. The transition wasn't sudden either. The Muppet movie had already proven in 1979 that the characters could thrive outside the theater.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first screening of the Muppet movie.
The Great Muppet Caper followed in 1981, and Henson made the call. End the show, go all in on film. That also opened the door to his darker passion projects like The Dark Crystal. And with 120 episodes in the can, the show hit the magic number for syndication, meaning that the Muppets would keep reaching audiences for decades without producing another frame. Now here's the part that most people get wrong. The last episode to air featured Roger Moore, but the last episode taped, the real farewell, was the Gene Kelly episode. And the writers buried goodbye notes all through it. Beauregard spent the whole show convinced that the world was ending. Pigs in space reached the end of the universe. The mystery announcer, heard but never seen for 119 episodes, finally showed his face. Even Veterinarian's Hospital finally seemed to cure their patient. And Kelly himself? Well, when he was booked, he told the writers that he didn't want to do Singing in the Rain, so they turned that into the episode's running gag. Kelly refusing to perform the one song that everyone wanted to hear. He spent the whole show insisting that he was there just to watch. And then, in the final moments, Rolf started playing the intro on the piano, and Kelly, well, he gave in. He picked up his umbrella, walked into the rebuilt replica of the original set, and then closed out the entire series with the most famous musical number in film history. "120 episodes, a complete run that never got tired, never got cheap, and it never overstayed its welcome. Most hit shows, well, they ride the wave until somebody drowns. But Henson, he walked off the beach at peak tide and left everyone wanting just one more season. Number 2, the Swedish chef's hands were real and they went rogue. Every Muppet on The Muppet Show had felt hands, stitched little fabric mitts that moved on rods or slipped over a performer's fingers like gloves. The Swedish chef had none of that. Those were real, actual human hands that stuck out of his sleeves, and they belonged to Frank Oz. The Swedish chef was a 2-person operation. Jim Henson stood behind the puppet, working the head and performing that glorious nonsense voice. It was mock Swedish gibberish that he developed by playing language instruction tapes in his car on the way to work and narrating fake recipes out loud at traffic lights. His son Brian rode with him and said it was the most ridiculous thing that he'd ever seen. Meanwhile, Frank Oz stood directly behind Henson, arms threaded through the chef's sleeves, providing both hands. No rods, no gloves, just Oz's bare hands chopping, stirring, flinging, and waving real knives and kitchen tools around while Henson tried to keep the head in character above him. And Oz made it worse, on purpose. He'd deliberately go off script with the hands, grab the wrong thing, he'd fumble a prop, or take a gag in a direction that Henson wasn't really expecting. Without any warning, Henson would just have to react in real time, keeping the chef's head and voice in sync with whatever chaos Oz had just introduced from below. Now, according to Oz, the best Swedish chef sketches were the ones that they barely rehearsed. Number 1, The Muppet Show came back, and it worked. Now, over the decades, there were attempts to bring it back. Muppets Tonight in the 90s, an office-style mockumentary series, just lasted one season. A Disney Plus improv show that barely anyone saw. None of them cracked the code, well, because none of them were The Muppet Show. They kept trying to make the Muppets something new instead of just letting them be what they already were. Then, in February of 2026, on the show's 50th anniversary, Disney finally just did the thing. They brought back the variety format. The Muppet Theater, the backstage chaos, Kermit trying to hold it all together while everything falls apart around him.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi-ho, and welcome to the Muppet Show, everybody.
Sabrina Carpenter as the guest star, Maya Rudolph in the audience, Seth Rogen getting his act cut by Fozzie Bear, the whole deal. And it landed. 7.58 million viewers across Disney Plus and ABC. 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics basically tripped over each other saying the same thing. The Muppets don't need to be updated. They just need to be themselves. The New York Times said that the Muppets exist outside of time. Time magazine said the revival recaptures both the format and the soul of the original. And the only complaint was that there wasn't enough of it. But here's the part that matters most. Dave Goelz was there, the same guy that we talked about earlier, the industrial designer who showed up with homemade puppets, got handed a blue whatever named Gonzo, and figured out the voice the morning of his first taping. The guy with 4 shoulder surgeries, a hip replacement, 9 surgeries total, 79 years old, and still performing, still in the pit, and still holding puppets over his head. Also a blue whatever with a cannon fetish can still make people laugh. He's the last original cast member from the 1976 run still actively performing with the Muppets. 50 plus years. And when that 2026 special aired, he was right there, doing Gonzo, Waldorf, Zoot, and Bunsen Honeydew like he never left. The special is also being called a backdoor pilot, which means that this might not be a one-off. There could be more. And honestly, after everything that we've covered, the diving bells, the puppet trenches, the name that means nothing, the show that ended before it had to, the idea that the Muppet Show could come back for real, it feels less like a reboot and more like unfinished business. And there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about the Muppet Show. Which one surprised you the most? Which one did we miss? Let us know in the comments, and hey, share this video with someone who randomly sings "Mahna, Mahna, me, 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 me" at inappropriate times. And be sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss any of our retro TV videos. Until next time, this is Remember When. See ya!